fun. If people could find a seat, we'll start the program in a few minutes. Thanks. Please take seats.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome. If I could get your attention, please. Welcome, everybody, to this celebration of, I think, Fred, pay attention. This is, I believe, a celebration of, is it 28 years? Fred, is it 28 years we're celebrating? 26. It feels like 28. But 26 years of Fred O. Harrell as the planter and founder and senior pastor of City Church San Francisco. Fred, or O, as I like to call him, is one of my oldest and closest friends, and I'm really thrilled to be asked to MC this event. My name is Scott Sherman, and I was a pastor here for quite a long time, and it's really great to be back and to see some people I haven't seen for several years. So, as you enjoy your food, we're going to have a group of people, Fred, who are going to be sharing tributes to you. I want to be first and just say that as we come to this moment, I feel so old. Because you and I are the same age. But I mainly feel grateful because your faithfulness to God changed my life. Just like I know it's changed the lives of so many people here. Fred and I have known each other since the early 90s, about 30 years. We first met, and Terely, and my wife Catherine, we've known each other that long. We first met in New York City, where I served as a pastor, and Fred, who's doing campus ministry, would bring college students up to the city. And one of the things I got to witness was I got to watch Fred fall in love with the city. And he really did fall in love with the city. He's really changed my life. I think the only difference I ever made in his life is I talked him out of going to plant a church in Long Island. and woo! And aren't you glad? Aren't you glad I did? We actually kind of planted churches in the early 90s around the same time. And that's where our friendship really grew, was in that partnership. And then in 2005, 17 years ago, he invited me to come here to be a part of City Church. And I think the thing I want to say is, just without going into it, say, I came out to what I think could easily be described as a very different church. A very different church. But Fred said to me, he said, I have a vision for change. To which I would say, good Lord. yeah, you did. You did have a vision for change. Now, I think it's important to say, buddy, that not all the roads we have been down have been paved. You've made some mistakes. And I'm just going to say, in my 17 years here, I can think of 2. That's right, at least 2. And you got to own those, man. You got to own those 2 mistakes that you made. But mainly, I think you've been faithful. I actually want to read something from an old lefty historian. Some of you will know Howard Zinn. This is from an article in The Nation about 20 years ago. And Howard Zinn said this. He said, if we remember those times and places, and there are so many where people have behaved magnificently, it gives us the energy to act, and at least the possibility of sending this spinning top of a world in a different direction. The future is an infinite succession of presents. And to live now as we think human beings should live, in defiance of all that is bad around us, is itself a marvelous victory. Fred, I think when you look around here and online, it's the fruit of nearly 30 years, 26 years of a countless succession of presents. A countless succession of presents really known only to God, day in, day out. Present moments, presents of spiritual bravery, of kindness, of sacrifice, of endurance, of opposition, and of repair when you got it wrong. And when I say known only to God, I do want to take this opportunity, because I don't work anymore, just to say to all of you, you have no idea. You just don't. You have no idea what it means to sit in that role for these many years, but God does. It was Jesus who sent this spinning top of the world in a different direction. But brother, you have made that promise more real for countless people. There are more people than we know, who are believing Christians following Jesus today because of that faithfulness, because of those presents. There are multiple leaders. There are new congregations. There are ministries like the one I've been leading, New Begin House of Studies, now known as the Center for Church Innovation. Affiliate ministries like City Hope and the Faith and Justice Network, and all the people you see here. And frankly, countless others, including many who now rest in God, who all today just want to say, thank you, Fred. Thank you. I love you. Thank you, Fred. Now, You're now about to hear some more interesting tributes. And we're going to start first with video, and I think you're going to see some faces that many of you will recognize.
Hi, Fred.
Hi, Terely.
It has been a great blessing for us to have been in communion with you for the last 22 years.
We have seen a lot of people come and go. You officiated our wedding. We have seen your little kids become grown-ups.
You've baptized all our kids. We know all your sermon stories by heart because we've heard them many, many times.
We still remember your sermon from maybe 20 years ago on how the Bible story begins in a garden but ends in a city. That sermon caused us to change our life plans and put down roots in our broken but beautiful city of San Francisco. And here we are 2 decades later.
So we want to thank you for faithfully leading City Church and serving San Francisco for the last 25 years. We know it wasn't an easy path, but looking back, we see how God worked through both of you to do great work.
Fred Harrell, I wore your favorite hat. Just wanted to say thank you. Thanks for looking out for me as a young pastor coming along. And City Church of Long Beach is super grateful for you and the way you've coached us towards thinking about LGBT inclusion in a lot healthier ways than we could have. So grateful for you and for all your ministry. God bless you in all that is to come.
Greetings, Fred and Terely. Cole's here. We are so grateful for you and all of the Harrells and for your many years of service to City Church in the Bay Area and beyond.
Thank you so much for living into San Francisco, not seeing it as a mission field, but rather a place to learn from and to appreciate and to love others. So we are grateful and wish you the best of luck in everything that both of you will be doing from here on. Thanks.
Love you guys.
Hi, City Church. This is Jonathan and Lorianne Gilly. We had the pleasure of being with Fred and Terely in the very, very early days of City Church, when the only employees at City Church were Fred and Jonathan, who was the director of worship. We shared a lot of really special family times with Fred and Terely. We remember getting to babysit the kids when Fred and Terely went to the hospital when London was born. And I have very distinct memories of all the Harrells, kids included, coming to visit us in the hospital when our 2 sons were born. A lot of special family times together.
Memories of leading worship at the Presidio Chapel on a beautiful October morning, collaborative ministry planning in the basement on Lake Street, and freezing at Giants games at Candlestick Park. So thanks for such wonderful times together and such wonderful memories. We love you, Fred and Terely.
Love you, Fred and Terely. All the best.
Hey, Fred, congratulations on your transition. I can only assume that you've been offered a senior ball boy position for the San Francisco Giants, so good luck with that. Sarah and I wish you all the best, to you and to Terely. It was a really extraordinary 5 years that we got to enjoy serving at City Church San Francisco, and I will remain grateful for our friendship. So, friend, grace and peace to you, and good luck with that new gig with the Giants.
Hey, Fred and Terely. You two have been a very powerful and healing presence in our lives as we walked through cancer together and Parkinson's. But you've both been such a point of laughter and joy as well. So whether it was sitting over a meal together or super good hugs or having really deep conversation together, which, as you know, is my thing, I will always remember things like Thanksgiving dinner at your family table many, many years ago. It was our first Thanksgiving without Hilda, and it was wonderful to be able to be a part of a family that night. You're such a fabulous cook, Terely, and you're a perfect host, Fred. The images that stand out in my mind are the late breakfast at Jack's, Terely, the one-on-ones with you, Fred, over the years, and I'll never forget less than an hour after I heard the words, "You have cancer," meeting up with you in Noe Valley and realizing what a safe presence you were going to be going through that chapter. You have each in your own way really been there for Larry and for me, for Parkinson's and cancer, but mainly you have been there for life, and we love you, and we'll miss you. Bye-bye.
Fred, my favorite times we spent together had very little to do with City Church. Rather, it was the times that we spent when the Detroit Tigers were in town. With you rooting for the Tigers and me rooting for the A's, we had great times together. You were the first pastor I ever had, Fred, who was as much of a sports fan and an athlete as I was, although your accomplishments on the field were much better than mine. Now, on a more serious note, you were the first one to notice the onset of my Parkinson's disease 7 years ago. I will be eternally grateful for your insight and concern which led me to treatment. Robin and I will always be so grateful that God led us to City Church and to you and Terely 14 years ago. Please have good luck in your future endeavors, and we'll miss you.
Hi, I'm Laura Hale. My husband Jamie and I were involved in the very first community group at City Church back in 1996. We met in the Harrell's living room while John Mark would color and Victoria would play dress up and Lucas would nap. No London yet. We learned from Fred and Terely what it was going to take to plant a teeny tiny seedling of a church. What I remember most about those early days was Fred and Terely's leadership on this was going to be a church not for ourselves, but for the city and how we might serve the city that we lived in and loved. That really is what informed all of our early decisions at the church and laid a great foundation, I think, for what it was to become. Really excited to see what the next phase holds, both for City Church and for the Harrells. Love you guys.
Congratulations on your retirement, Fred and Terely. So grateful that you'll have the opportunity to enjoy retirement in San Francisco and in Mexico. I want to tell you how grateful I am for your vision, white-hot vision for church planting. 19 years ago, we came to help start a church in the North Bay, and there's been churches started in the East Bay and big help in the South Bay. And then from us, there's been other churches that have started. And so your white hot vision for church planting and church plants that make much of Jesus has been something that I'm so grateful for, and I think will have an enduring future. So thank you so much.
To know you, Fred, is special. Truly, I am so grateful to be able to call you friend, that you are my friend. And I would say when I get to see you, the first thing that comes to my mind is a sense of ease and safety. That when we embrace and share that hug, I can feel myself like relax into that moment, knowing that I am safe with you. And that's a rare thing. And I'm really grateful for it. As a gay person, I'm also incredibly grateful for all of the risk and the work and all of the crud that came your way on our behalf. The ripples of your work, of creating a community that is safe and affirming and inclusive for all of us who are LGBTQ+. There just aren't words. And I meet with people every day who get to experience the beauty and the goodness, and it impacts their very lives every day. And I hope you know that. I think you know that. The amazing impact that you've made on our world. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for your mentorship, for being in my life. It is just not a small thing. I love you. Grateful for you.
Greetings from London. Terry and I met Fred about 25 years ago at the coffee hour of the church we were attending in San Francisco. Having already lived here for a dozen years, I sized him up and said something diplomatic like, "We don't need a new church in the city." I was just diplomatic enough to leave out my judgmental opinions of Southerners, and I was yet to meet Terely. One of the graces of the second half of life is an increase in humility and an increased ability to recognize when I am wrong. And I was wrong that day, because our life's journey has been a dance of intimacy between our friendship with Fred and Terely, City Church, and our own spirituality. Along with City Church, we have moved toward love in many corners of our life, from parenting to polity. We have moved from excluding parts of ourselves and others to including them. We moved from guilt to grace, from confinement to spaciousness. Many people in the second half of life do not share this incredible blessing, to have transformed in the company of friends and a church. Terry and I are excited about welcoming a new generation of leadership to City Church and our continued journey in the third of life with lifetime friends. Godspeed, Fred and Terely.
Hello, City Church. My name is Brent Webster, and I am the first pastoral intern that City Church ever had, which of course means that I am Fred's favorite intern. Fred, I wish that I could be there today to tell you what an impact you've had on my life. I don't think anyone has impacted me more as a minister of the gospel. I hear your voice in my head all the freaking time, all the time. I hear it when I'm preparing sermons. I hear it when I'm praying before sermons. I hear it when I'm meeting with people. You taught me how to think about the gospel. You taught me how to think about people, and you taught me how to think about a church, not just for ourselves. And I want to say to you, thank you, dear friend, and that I wish you many, many blessings in this next season of life and ministry.
Hi, Fred. Matthew Vines here, just wanting to extend my congratulations and also my deep gratitude for your leadership of City Church, especially for your decision in 2015 to lead the church to become fully affirming of LGBTQ Christians. I know that was not an easy thing to do, but I and so many others are incredibly grateful to you for it, both for what it meant for City Church and for the example that you set for so many other pastors and churches. So thank you for your leadership, your example, and your friendship. Blessings to you and congratulations.
Hey, Fred and Terely. I just want to send all my best wishes for you in your next stage of life and just say how thankful I am for the time I had at City Church with y'all and learning how to say y'all. That was awesome. And all y'alls, got that one down. It was such a privilege to be in the office there at City Church and then also sing with Carl and with Jonathan way back in the oldie days when the dream team was there. I wish I could be there in person. I love you and I will be rooting for you no matter what comes up. And if you're ever back in Portland, come say a howdy do. Mwah. Bye.
Fred Harrell, the Reformed Church in America has been honored and privileged to have you serve as a minister of Word and Sacrament. And as you guided City Church into the life of our fellowship, it's had a profound impact on hundreds of congregations. The ministry of City Church has been innovative, missional, and deeply impactful and widely inclusive, in that you have demonstrated what it looks like to embody the height and breadth and depth of the love of God in Jesus Christ. And that influence has flowed forth richly through the grace of God. I thank you so deeply on behalf of hundreds throughout the Reformed Church in America. But more than that, I look forward keenly to the next chapter of ministry that God is calling you to, and to see the new ways in which your gifts will be given so creatively and powerfully to so many as we continue the work of seeking God's reign. Thank you, Fred.
Okay, now we are going to hear some equally vivid and brief, compelling tributes in person. And so the order of those who are coming, we're going to hear first, these are such great names, Micah Hohorst, followed by Hal Oates, Liz Moore, Lois Melkonian, and then Katie and Margaret Lynn Martori. Right? Okay, so if you could just remember your order, just come on up, and we got a mic for you here. Okay, generous applause for everyone who comes up.
Hello. Okay. Let's see if we can do this. I'm crying at just about every moment of this event here. Hey, Fred. Okay, I'm Micah. In 2009, when my husband Chris and I arrived at City Church, we were desperate for a new kind of church. I wasn't sure what that meant. I was a new mom, and see, I'm telling y'all, I had just left full-time ministry. I was exhausted. And I was looking for a spiritual home where my questions and my doubt and my exhaustion were taken seriously. I wanted to find people who loved Scripture and still honored doubt. I wanted to see women valued as leaders. And I didn't want to check my brain at the door. Chris and I moved to San Francisco on a Friday night and came to City Church that Sunday. And we stayed for 12 years. City Church is a place where Scripture is both loved and wrestled with. A place where we are invited to integrate our faith into our whole selves. And all of that is true because Fred led us there. I've never known a leader like Fred who is so unafraid of changing his mind around significant spiritual and theological ideas, and who is willing to bring the church along with him into the change. As my friend Jared said, Fred moves toward change in a kingdom-minded, winsome way. When I showed up in the middle of City Church's story in 2009, Fred was already coming out of a massive shift of theology and practice. The church had left the PCA because of Fred's leadership and commitment to seeing women valued as full members of the body of Christ. And the changes that came less than a decade later in welcoming our LGBTQ plus siblings as full members of the body of Christ was the natural overflow of a leader who was always asking questions, grappling with Scripture, and who was and is brave enough to risk being misunderstood and cut off from places of belonging for the sake of growth and the leading of the Holy Spirit. Those changes have been heartbreakingly hard, and they have transformed him and the church over and over. In 2014, when Fred asked me to talk to him about the possibility of coming on the elder board, I was a mom of little kids in my mid-30s. And about every male pastor in evangelical America would have breezed right past me when considering who might best serve in leadership on the board. But the way Fred valued and honored my gifts was an overflow of the work of Jesus in his life. Fred was not raised up in a church or trained in a seminary that said that the 35-year-old mom should lead the church. But his openness to transformation, his willingness to change his mind was part of God's own work in my life. I became a lady who preaches in churches because Fred believed in me enough to invite me to do it here. And when we met to discuss my coming on the elder board, I had concerns, mostly that my theology had shifted. I was uncomfortable stepping into a leadership position in a church that wasn't fully embracing and honoring our LGBTQ siblings. And Fred told me something that terrified and thrilled me that day. He wasn't comfortable either. And he was ready to lead City Church to something new. Fred, I recently told my boys that I'm pretty sure that if I live to be an old lady, one of the choices I made in my life that I'm most proud of will be helping lead City Church to full inclusion. I've written a lot of things in my career, but the letter we wrote in March of 2015 is maybe one of the most important things I've helped pen. That season was rough, and we navigated it not always beautifully. The fallout from a decision that shook our church to its core. But I'm so grateful I got to be part of a decision that welcomed and affirmed the people Jesus welcomes and affirms. And that will always be one of the greatest things I've done with my life. And I'm so proud and honored I got to do it alongside you. Change is hard, and Fred and Terely, you have taught us that the kind of change Jesus invites us into is messy and sometimes dangerous. But when it's the work of the Spirit, it transforms everything. Thank you for letting yourselves be transformed. We love you.
Thanks, Micah. Can you hear me? All right. Always jump to this. Thanks, Micah. Tough act to follow. I met Fred and Terely about 25 years ago. My name's Hal. And don't worry, I'm not going to rehash all of our history, I promise. I've got 3 points, though. You taught me well. The first one is my wife, Kirsten, and I are so grateful for you, Fred, and you, Terely. We're grateful for your love, for your faithful friendship, for your prayers, for our family, for our marriage, for my business, before I even began it. So we're very, very, very thankful for both of you in our lives. Second, before I came to City Church, I'd attended lots of churches all my life. And I'd learned a lot about learning about God. I heard about God, I read about God, but I'd never attended a church where we talked about just simply knowing God. And it began a radically different pathway for me to pursue a personal relationship with God. And I feel like that's been the ethos of City Church all along, and sadly that was very unique in my life. And so I'm so grateful for your encouragement and for setting up your teaching, our culture, the community, to simply know God and support each other on that journey. And then also, from the very, very beginning, you taught us to serve San Francisco. And that's been the DNA of our church ever since. And not just serve with our finances, but serve with our time and volunteer and to serve people who are suffering. And so for me, it was the first time in my life I'd ever actually volunteered. And I began at City Team, and then County Jail, and then later on with Paul at City Hope. And so thank you for encouraging me to serve our city. And it's changed my life, and I know it's changed the lives of many, many others. So thank you for your encouragement, and I love you, man.
I wanted to share today how Fred has had a huge impact on my journey of faith over the last 13 years. Bear with me. So I moved to San Francisco when I was 22 years old, and I was enrolled in law school. I came here straight from a dimly lit, fog machine using mega church in Santa Barbara, and I was adjusting to a new city. I was heartbroken from a breakup. I was cold, and now in retrospect, I realized I was an evangelical Christian in law school, beginning the process of what we call deconstruction. Law school teaches you to question everything, and I was questioning and doubting my faith, and it was terrifying. Fred started to really surprise me back then. I'd gone to church probably 90% of the Sundays in my life. But believe it or not, I'd never heard a pastor on stage mention the word anxiety. I'd never heard a pastor normalize doubt. Fred would say, like he said today, however you find yourself here today. And then he would list all kinds of things like sad and uncertain, brokenhearted. Later, I'd hear him mention being in therapy himself. And a pastor who not only supports therapy, but admits he needs it himself? That was crazy to me. There were Sundays when it was hard to come because I was sad or exhausted from trying to believe, really. Fred's sermons repeatedly told me that I belonged, and I began to see that I hadn't been taught the whole story about who God actually loves and accepts. Fred would often say that we all most want to be fully known and then fully loved. This blew my mind, and honestly, it still does. Fred taught me that even as a lifelong doubter, God still loves me. A few years later, I mentioned to Fred that some of my roommates and community group of friends had been discussing our LGBTQ friends and their exclusion from church. A few months after I made that comment, Fred drove all the way to downtown Oakland, where I was working at the courthouse at the time, and met with me over a bowl of pho. He wanted to know what were his congregants wrestling with on that issue. And a few months after that, I remember it being March 3rd, 2015, pivotal day. We met for breakfast at Sweet Maple down the street. And Fred told me that he and the elders felt that God was asking them to make a change in the way City Church included the LGBTQ community. I looked at him very stunned. In my complete naivete, I said, "You know this is going to cost you, right?" And as I recall, he choked up and said, "I do." As the next few years played out, and it was super, super, super hard all along the way, I felt a continued sense of appreciation for Fred to take this risk. Most of my life, I went to churches led by pastors who were probably too afraid to risk it all to really answer God's call. I think we can all agree Fred has changed a lot since he founded this church. And by him leading into his personal growth, I believe we've all been pushed in the right direction. What a gift. I can't end by mentioning Terely, though. My husband Ryan and I have had the privilege of being friends with Fred and Terely and spending a lot of quality time together over good food and dirty martinis. She's equally awesome as Fred. Everybody should know that. And I really consider her to be one of the strongest, wisest, kind, and creative people that I know. So, Fred and Terely, I want you to know that, to quote you again today, I've relearned God's love because of your perseverance, wisdom, and friendship. Thank you.
Well, hello there. My name is Lois. Hi, Terely. Hi, Fred. And this is a story of redemption. When Fred reached out to me in 1996 to tell me that he wanted to plant a PCA church in San Francisco, we met for coffee. And I, like Kim Watson, said to him, "Do we need a church that doesn't ordain women? You're coming to San Francisco." So I didn't initially come to Fred and Terely's church for that very reason. But Fred and Terely and people in leadership came up with a very creative way that women could have leadership. Some of us who like the microphone could pray from the front of the church, prayers of the people. So people who came in had no idea we were PCA. I did that for years. Thank you very much. And Terely, I know you were behind that. So, and I really want you to know that I had 3 sons at the time. I still have 3 sons. I was married to somebody else at the time. I went through a lot, so you'll hear about that in a second. But my 3 sons and the Harrells' 4 kids and the Watsons' 3 kids would have play dates every single Thursday. This is what we did. And there are places in San Francisco you can take your kids, and we found all of them for that many children. And the reason we could stay so close over these years is because we all had core values that were the same. And we lived from Micah 6:8. Justice is so important. And loving each other with mercy is critical. And walking humbly with our God. So no matter what we went through, we could come back to those things. And that's really important because in every church, there is drama. And unfortunately, I was part of that. And I am living proof that you can throw it all to the wind, move or run more than 1,000 miles away, be excommunicated with cause, yes, I know, and find healing, forgiveness, a new path, and an invitation to say farewell to Fred and Terely 20 years later. So I want to let you know I'm really proud to be here with my husband of 10 years, Art, my BFF, Shireen Perry, who lives in San Francisco. God has a sense of humor, and we are all loved, and we are on this wonderful path together. I still recall the day that Fred called to tell me that he had left the PCA and that women could now be in leadership. I was so excited. I was in the car getting ready to do one of my shifts on the air in, you remember this? I was in the parking lot going into KOA radio in Denver, getting ready to go online, and he's telling me that, oh my goodness, this is what's happened, that he's now no longer part of the PCA. And then a few years later to read that same letter, and I didn't know who all was drafting that, but I got to read that as well, to hear the huge shift to LGBTQ+. Boy, what a thrill. Where I want to share with you is that Fred has always sought to speak into where we live, and where we all live continues to shift. And the shifts that he has pioneered through City Church do demonstrate his willingness to listen to the cries of his people, of women, of men, of kids, of LGBTQ, and of all of us all around us. This is redemption. Thank you.
Hello, this is Mateo. This is my wife, Katie, and I'm Margaret. For those of you that don't know me, I'll tell you something about myself. I am really good at compartmentalizing. In my job as an emergency room doctor, this can be very helpful and truthfully necessary, but at times it can be quite detrimental. And as someone who identifies as LGBTQ+, and is also Christian, I've had to compartmentalize other parts of my life as well. And it wasn't until I came to City Church and met Fred that I realized that those two aspects of my identity could not only be reconciled, but could actually be celebrated together. City Church is the first place where I truly felt accepted. And Fred is the first person that I could truly call my pastor. It's the first place where I felt comfortable bringing my full self to church and not having to hide aspects of myself. It's the first place where I felt comfortable holding my wife's hand during a service. It's where I finally feel like I have a church community and where my child, Mateo, was baptized. I don't think I can fully put into words how grateful I am for City Church and for Fred and his ministry, but from the bottom of my heart, thank you.
As Margaret mentioned, we were lucky enough to have Fred baptize Mateo. And as it was last year, we got to do it at our house, which was so special for all of us. And it meant that our friends and our family could come as well. My uncle so enjoyed Fred, as everyone does, that the next day he showed up for service, even though we didn't. That just speaks volumes. We're also lucky enough to have many of our LGBTQ small group members come, and they've become like family to us. Without Fred's leadership and willingness to take on such an important thing, we never would have met these people or really felt like this place was home. And so we are really thankful for everything you've done, and we are so, so grateful for getting to know you and for having you in our life. Thank you so much.
Round of applause for all these people who are showing up. Yeah. Thank you all. So moving. Okay, now we're going to hear from two key leaders in this community, leaders of affiliate ministries. So first, Paul Trudeau, followed by Peter Choi.
Hello, Fred. So I am intern number 2. I've heard the praise of Brent Webster all my life. It feels like it's a long shadow that I lived in. But when I first met you, Fred, it was in the spring of 2005, and I was in a weird place. I was in a seminary that emphasized things that I couldn't really follow along with often. I was being called into, or maybe motivated into a denomination I really didn't feel called to and didn't fit in. I was in Florida, which is just weird. And you showed up at a brown bag lunch, and you said, and I had shared some of my concerns about the denomination, and just was kind of in that place where I didn't belong. And you said, well, come out to the West Coast. I'll show you how I do the PCA. So I packed up all my stuff, and Liz and I drove out with our dog, and we landed, and within months you said, we're leaving the PCA. It has been an incredibly wild ride with you. Plenty of ups and downs, but God was calling me, and I was hearing your call at the same time. We were called together to love this city well and to learn and to have God use this city in our lives, and it has been incredibly wild. Back in 2005, Scott was there. First I came in, Carl looked at me strange. I saw Catherine Sherman putting together Scott's desk. I'll never forget that, because she was better at that than you, Scott. But I jumped right into a church that was serving the city already and was giving radically. I started connecting with our partners, and I had no idea how much financially we were supporting them too. And that was in the DNA of the church even before City Hope was a thing. And I was able to go into the jails and in the rehabs and in the hospitals and the school along with all of you. And we followed the commitment of this church together, and that is to serve this city. And it has always served us well to follow the gospel. There were times when this was 17 years ago I've been here, times when this room was completely packed. 3 services, I'll never forget it. Having service in Davies, so many people. So it was like a dating scene every Sunday. People getting married every weekend. Babies were being born. They're all now teenagers now. And I got to say, Fred, that for most pastors would be the pinnacle right there, is a full room, Davies Symphony Hall. But it wasn't for you, because you knew our doors actually weren't that wide. The table wasn't long enough. And one of the things I always admire about you is you were called to the gospel of Jesus Christ. You're willing to take huge risks and humble yourself in those moments. And that's what this church really needed, to welcome people and call people into the call of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So I want to thank you for always taking risks, motivated by love. I also want to say thank you for taking a risk on me. We're very different. And yet you let me just kind of go off and do my thing. And when I brought up the idea of City Hope and that we wanted a community center, we're going to plop it right in the Tenderloin. We're going to do all these creative things to bring dignity to the people that we serve as we serve them. And we want to do housing, all these things. It was a big green light from you right away. And it's not surprising. It made sense to you. It was already in our DNA, and we were able to do quite a crazy thing and plan a community center and start housing and do all these wonderful things. And that was under your leadership, and I'm really thankful that you've always been a person that is willing to take those massive risks in order to follow the mandate of Christ. And it's not just for us, but it's for people that we don't see yet that we want to welcome into these doors. So I've learned a ton from you over that time, but I got to say, one of the things that has impacted me the most is when I've seen you in your darkest moments, the biggest struggles that you've had, and what I specifically mean is times with your family where you needed to change as a father and as a husband. those were the days as a staff member that I would see you coming in off of a Sunday where you kind of dragged yourself up here to give your best sermon, and you were just exhausted. And as others have said, you went through a therapeutic process, and we're open and transparent about that. And I just really admire you in that moment specifically, because as we all know, one of the hardest things you can ever do in your life is actually change. And I saw real change take place in you and your family in those moments. And I want you to know that ministry that you have in serving and sacrificing for your family has had a huge impact on me as a person. And so to your family, Terely, I am a pastor, and I get a lot of praise sometimes at City Hope, and people say thank you all the time, and I instantly think of my wife in those moments. We're nothing without a spouse that supports us in those moments, Terely. We're nothing. Yeah. So, Terely, I want to say thank you for all the ways that you have served this church. You've sacrificed for this faith community. And I really mean that. Fred, I want to say this to you. It's Terely's turn. We need a flan empire. I'm excited about this family. I'm excited about your business, and I'm just so grateful to the whole Harrell family for all that you have given to this church. Thank you so much.
When I came to City Church 8 years ago in 2014, I had no idea what I was in for. You could say I had a little idea, but it was all wrong. I was coming out of one of the most intense periods of my life, and I was ready to settle into a quieter chapter of life. Now, let's be clear, I wasn't expecting a life of ease. I just thought I'd have some evenings free, get to know a new city, and enjoy being back on the West Coast. Looking back now, of course, I realize how wrong and blind and foolish I had been. But no need to beat a dead horse, especially when that horse is the dreams of one's youth. Let's just say it's been a wild ride. Much of it thanks to Fred. But here's the thing, I really mean that. I thank Fred for all of the trouble, I guess you could say good trouble, he has led me into. There's no denying it's been an unexpected ride full of twists and turns. Bridges were burned, and the road, far from rising up to meet us, collapsed under us, at least a few times. It may seem strange to express gratitude for the unraveling of a life, but that's exactly what I feel, in abundance. By watching Fred through the years, I saw what it looks like to choose discomfort and disruption over the way things have always been. I saw what it looks like, and frankly, what it costs to take one's lumps, to set aside ego and face criticism and misunderstanding and the attrition of achievements you had labored for years, decades, a lifetime building. Now, if you know me, you know how allergic I am to any kind of cult of personality and heroicizing people. But this is where I've learned the value of real, up-close friendships. Because when literally everything else in the world and in all of my direct experience told me the opposite, that beneficiaries of the status quo will never change the status quo, Fred helped me to see a different and higher truth, that another way is possible, a way of curiosity, and willingness to learn and change, that surrendering the silver platter of privilege is possible. You have to know how rare that is and why it's important to give thanks when we are blessed to encounter such people. So in conclusion, when I think about the work we're doing now at Faith and Justice, I want to thank you, Fred. And I think it's the highest compliment I can express. I want to thank you for modeling a life of seeking faith and learning justice. Much of the work that I'm doing today, I learned from watching you. And I know I'm not the only one. You have inspired and challenged so many of us to do better. Now, let's not get carried away. It's not like we're going to rename Faith and Justice the Fred Harrell Center. What I can offer, and I do offer with all my heart, is my highest praise and deepest thanks.
Let's give it up for the apostles, Peter and Paul. That's that, right? And now, what a privilege to introduce to you somebody who now needs no introduction, your new senior pastor, Emily McGinnis. Come on up, Emily. Wait. Sorry. Let me introduce to you your old senior pastor, Fred Harrell. Sorry, I got it backwards. Come on, Fred. Come on.
Yeah, I'm going to introduce her. Whoever thought of asking Scott to be the MC, thank you. Very good choice. So many great stories. I'm going to have to make it quick because I know we're already over time. In January of 1996, the folks who recruited me to come here wanted an answer, and I wasn't giving them one. I was vacillating about whether to say yes to this idea of moving to San Francisco to start a church. We took the kids into bed one night in Knoxville in our home there, and in the hallway, Terely stopped me. She grabbed my arms and looked me in the eye, and she says, "I want you to know that you can do this." And the only thing I would correct in that is we can do this, because it was 100% a joint effort. But that was the first time that I believed that this dream is something that could happen. I still wasn't ready to say yes. Still waited a few more days, but that was the beginning of the end, as it were, of my time in Knoxville. That's the unique power of being a spouse for all of you that I've done premarital counseling with that I told you about. And there were lots of tears. About 2 years ago, Terely asked me in bed one night, as we talked about the future, she meant something about, well, you're doing this maybe 5 more years, and I cried again, because I knew that couldn't be the case. I knew God was just as surely has called me into this, was also calling me out of it, into a different role at the least, and a different future. And so I'm grateful that the same strong sense of call that I had in coming here is the same sense of call, and it matches the call to hand it over. More on that in just a minute. But what I want to just say is thank you to a few people. For anyone who's ever attended, regulars, members, one-timers, once-a-yearers, and every other category, it's been a privilege to be your pastor in whatever way that has happened, and I really do mean that. Anyone who's ever given a dime, your generosity is a huge reason that we're all able to be here and to celebrate all that God has done today. Anyone who helped us launch, including so many who felt they couldn't stay after 2015. You are loved, your labor is not and has never been in vain, and I miss you more than you know. To Lewis Ruff, standing right here. Lewis, will you please stand so everybody can see who you are? Yeah, this is Lewis Ruff, ladies and gentlemen. Lewis is the person who called me in April of 1995 and found out that I had in fact not gone to Long Island, that Scott had rescued me from that bad idea. Not that Terely was ever going to move to Long Island in the first place, mind you. But Lewis is the person who recruited me to come out here and said, I think you'd be perfect for San Francisco. I want you to consider it. I told him he was crazy. He told me he wasn't crazy. And I went downstairs and I told Terely, and she looked at me and said, that's probably it. And sure enough, it was. So thank you, Lewis. Thank you. There's so many churches that have been started on the west coast of this country because of that man right there. And thank you so much, Lewis, for everything and your ongoing encouragement to me over the years. And that goes for all those. I know there's a lot of folks in the PCA who are probably watching right now who are really close, good friends of mine. My dearest friend outside of my marriage is a PCA pastor. And so I thank you to them for the way they stewarded me through those years of my life. There were a couple of churches that really made this church happen. First Presbyterian Church of Jackson, Pearl Orchard Presbyterian Church of Jackson, Cedar Springs Presbyterian Church of Knoxville, Tennessee, and Spanish River Presbyterian Church in Boca Raton all gave money that enabled us to get off the ground. So thank you to all of them. You invested in a church that would in one way or another begin 23 other congregations all over this country and ministries and organizations that to this day bless the world. There's also this person, the last person you saw here was Wes Granberg Michelson. Wes was the person who ran the Reformed Church in America, the RCA. He was the general secretary. And thank you to Wes for giving us a pathway to engage and be involved in another group of people who are seeking to be God's presence in this world, and for all of the wisdom and encouragement. And there's a person that's not here today that would probably never come to this, my therapist, Dr. Gordon Preston. I knew this is where I would cry. I spent 12 years with this man almost every Monday, unpacking my life, saying things out loud I'd never said to anybody. And I can't imagine my life without those 12 years of support, insight, and care. I've often thought, I have not only often thought this, I have oftentimes thought that I wonder whether I would have taken this job if I knew what God was going to require of me in this journey. And without Dr. Preston, I'm not sure how I would have survived, to be honest. So, Dr. Gordon Preston, wherever you are right now, probably in Marin County, thank you. Staff members, elders and deacons first. For all of you, so many of you here are elders and deacons from the past, and those of you watching online, thank you for being patient with me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for supporting me. Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for walking alongside me. And there's one elder I want to point out. John Matheny, wherever you are. John was one of the first ever elders here, he and Eric Hom. And Eric, if you're watching, I know you live in Mississippi, so maybe not, but love you. But John is, I always joke in the new member courses that John is that person in that one picture that you've seen up here, and we're at the Presidio Chapel, and he's holding the offering. And he's been on the finance team ever since. It's apparently a life sentence. But there are so many ways in which John, just by virtue of him being here in his presence and holding all this memory, has been such an important anchor for this church in very subtle but really beautiful ways, and such a support to me. So thank you, John. Yeah. Staff members, all of you who are here, those of you that are not here, thank you for your patience. Thank you for your care. Thank you for your inspiration and your making City Church what it is. I didn't do that. You all did that together. And so thank you to all of you. Musicians, the masterful work of Carl, Mina, Jason Morrell, Jonathan Gilly, so many others, you all have provided in many ways the soundtrack of so many of our lives. I find myself humming this music all the time. And I know I've heard that. I see the nods right now. It has been the same for you as well. And to all the people that set up and make everything happen every week, thank you so much. We are the beneficiaries of your work. And thanks to all of you for your patience, especially for the long sermons, for your care, for so many of you who gave me the benefit of the doubt when it was kind of hard to come by. and for inspiring me to be more and more a Jesus follower in this community. And I want to thank Emily McGinley, your new senior pastor. Emily, for having the courage to step out in this new adventure. When I'm asked how I'm feeling about this transition, I respond very positively, and people ask why, and I tell them one of the biggest reasons is Emily McGinley, and how happy I am to hand this over to someone like her. This leads us kind of to thinking about what the future has in store for us. We all know change. Even when the change comes, we can celebrate it, we welcome it, but this congregation knows as well as any that it can be very difficult. And with change comes some grief, even as it brings the anticipation of newness. And so while I want you to be as eager as I am to see what God is about to do in this city church as I am, I also know that things will feel differently than they have before, and that's okay. For some of you, that transition is something you would welcome, and you're ready to jump in. For others, it's going to be difficult. And let's just say that out loud, and that's okay as well. That's all part of it. I want you to open your hearts to what might come. You don't have to feel like it will be better. It will definitely be different, but it will also be good. Because the same God who has led us in this journey here continues to lead us in mission and in love for this city and to be God's presence in it. I'm so convinced of Emily's fit for this chapter. I've told so many of you about this, but her gifts of entrepreneurship, of vision, of leadership, of really doing the work, of including everyone in everything, just makes her such a fantastic fit to jump in here at City Church, and I'm just so grateful. Those gifts were immediately recognizable to me when I talked with her on the phone, or actually on Zoom, the very first time. It was funny, I remember that conversation because I was getting very excited talking to her. This is like early, before she was even willing to say, I'd like to think about this. And she said about 3/4 of the way through, she said, well, it seems like you obviously think I can do this job, so why don't you tell me why? I said, I love that so much. So you've heard a lot about her. I want you to hear from herself. Ladies and gentlemen, Emily McGinley.
Thank you so much. And thanks to the screaming babies who finally just gave up and fell asleep for sticking around. It is so good to be able to be with you all here today. I actually almost exactly a month ago and a couple of days was in a very similar spot that Fred is today, saying goodbye to a congregation that I often like to think of as my first child, looking around at faces that I hadn't seen for quite some time, the stories that were attached to those faces, stories of devastating medical diagnoses, of coming out to themselves, not to mention to their parents, stories of marriages that were in really rough spots, and first-time parents who were trying to figure out who they were, and figuring out how to say goodbye, and to say, God's got you, in the same ways that God had you before. So I consider it an honor to be able to join with you today and to hear some of what that legacy has been. And also to know, like I'm sure Fred does, all of the mistakes that were made and shortcomings of personal gifts or decision-making that happened along the way too. And so I know that many of you are here because you saw the fullness of who Fred was and what the ministry here at City Church has been, and it made a difference in your life, whether or not you continue to call this place your spiritual home. As I have been thinking about coming here and imagining of what life could look like together in this next chapter, I'm so grateful to have been able to hear these stories so that I know what I already experienced, which was there is such a strong foundation of faithfulness in this community. I'm grateful to be able to build on it with good leaders. You have some pretty amazing elders and other leadership too. And as Fred mentioned, we talked about a year ago, and I was sort of like, wow, this is a church that can do hard things. this is an interesting community. And with every conversation I had with members of the search team, and then later on congregants and references, I met Scott saying, like, give me all the tea, you know, I gotta understand what's going on. Just the honesty that folks brought increased my courage and my sense of conviction, like, oh, Spirit is leading me here. She's doing something. And so I'm just grateful for all of the ways that were made in order to have me come here. And I wanted to share with you a few words, Fred, and maybe with all of you as well, this poem that I was introduced to by Amanda Gorman, who some of you might know was the inaugural poet for the most recent inauguration. It's called Closure. And I won't read the whole poem, but I'll read the first part. To begin again isn't to go backwards, but to decide to go. Our story is not a circle carved, but a spiral, shaped, spinning, shifting inward and outward ad infinitum, like a lung on the bank of speech. This is a pause until you begin again. And so blessings to you, Fred, and blessings to all of you as we begin to live and work and move together in faith and faithfulness with courage, leaning into the mystery of who God is. And in the words of Dag Hammarskjöld, which I never thought I would ever say, but I heard this and I was like, this is good. For all that has been, thanks. And for all that will be, yes.
Okay. And lastly, to the most important people in the world to me, in just a second. Okay, I'm looking forward to whatever that is, I'm looking forward to it. I have to say thank you to my children. Perfect timing, Barbara. I'm talking about my children because they're watching online right now. One of them in Vietnam is watching right now. And around the country. Being a preacher's kid is not an easy task. London is here today, our San Francisco baby. Along with Victoria, Lucas, and John Mark, all of you in your own way have been the greatest gifts of my life. I've learned so much from you. In so many ways, you had to sacrifice without being asked to make this church happen. And there are a lot of PKs in here who know this to be the case. Whether you can grasp that or not, everyone, you are in many ways the beneficiary of John Mark and Victoria and Lucas and London and their patience and their helping to grow their parents up. I'm reminded of a Dan Allender book who titled it How Children Raise Parents. That's certainly been part of our journey, and I'm sure it has yours. And then, of course, lastly, but not leastly, Terely. As I said earlier, we did plant this church together. You should always refer to it as a co-pastoring job, because it's just none of it possible. I don't know if you know, Terely was the unpaid children's ministry director for the first 4 years of the church. This is when she was pregnant with London throughout the first year. This is her taking 1 week off and then coming back the next Sunday to set up all the children's ministry stuff. So things like maternity and paternity care and leave, while wonderful, were not actually in the frame of reference of a lot of people in 1997, especially in church world. She also then would serve another term as children's ministry director later on, this time insisting on being paid. I didn't know it at the time. I wouldn't have called it this at the time, but that was an Enneagram 9 finding her voice. If you were thankful for City Church existing, then you should honestly thank Terely. I love you in a million ways. 35 years of marriage, 3.5 years of dating, 6 months of which I broke up with her because I lost my frickin' mind. But almost 40 years by your side, and I'm eternally grateful. I'm thankful today that over time, I was able to tell you a better story about Jesus that invites us into a new way of being in the world, to show you what God is like. God is like Jesus, as you've heard me say so many times, who welcomes the outsider, who is prioritizing the poor, who never turns away in the face of sinners, but moves toward them in love, and who tells us to love our enemies, to extend mercy, to forgive 70 times 7, and who had compassion on the multitudes, because as we said today, they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd, who saw those who were erased or felt erased, who loved to the very end, who tells stories of God's being a shepherd, who goes after the one lost sheep, the father who receives and embraces the prodigal, and who can be trusted in all of our anxiety. Jesus, who in the face of receiving violence, injustice, and murder, doesn't retaliate, but recycles that into love, mercy, and forgiveness. Live into that story, City Church of San Francisco. God bless you. I'll take this one.
Hey, wait, Fred, I need you back up here. Yeah, you're supposed to stay. I thought it would be appropriate if I dressed up like a gator because
I like it already.
I feel I've heard them mentioned a couple times since I've been here. So from one gator to another.
Love it.
The children of City Church, there have been a lot of them, and of course, a lot of them are really grown up, but they just wanted to give you a little something. You've baptized a lot of them, so
yes, I have.
There's more pictures in the back there.
Oh my gosh.
That's for you. Thank you, Pastor Fred.
Wow. It's so good. The commitment to that costume is amazing. Yeah. Thank you, Barbara, and all the children.
Well, thanks everyone for coming. I'd say, and I know we're running over time, so I'll try to keep this short. It wouldn't be a City Church event if we're running at least 15 to 20 minutes over time. Anyway, yeah, thank you again. I hope you've all enjoyed the celebration today. I'm Thomas Lee, one of the elders here. I go by he, him pronouns. Before we conclude today, just a couple of things. There is some cake. Barbara arranged for some cake, so if you didn't see it coming in for your food, go grab it. It's over on the bar. On your tables, also, there are some thank you cards and pens. Feel free to fill them out if you'd like to give a message to Fred and Terely. Also, online, we've been collecting videos, photos, messages on a Kudo board. There is a QR code on your table. Feel free to take a shot of that and submit something for that board. We'll have that open through the 5th. So if you don't go dig into your old photos and all of that and bring and submit those to the Kudo board. A few folks to thank who were a big part in making today happen. Planning committee, including myself, Ryan Eipersbach, Liz Moore, Jason Morrell, Carl Diggernis, Melissa Blankenship, Barbara Lyon, Stephen Gunlock. Thank you so much. I put in a lot of extra time for this. The beverages today, Hal from Porthos and Paul from Orabora. Thank you so much. They're delicious. They're awesome. The team at Chow Pascal, Dan Shaw, and those group, our numbers kept going up and up and up, and they were super flexible and really easy to work with. So appreciate all of their work. And Terely, thanks for recommending it. It was amazing. Let's see. Volunteers at the beverage table: Brett, Adrian, Jessica, Rachel. Thank you. And then our technical crew: RJ and Dennis, who do the setup. Jody, Kim, Steven, in the back on the AV and the streaming. Great job today, as you do every Sunday. Thank you so much. To everyone who spoke on stage and by video today, really appreciate the time that you took to share your thoughts and stories. They're just an excellent testament to everything that Fred and Terely have done for us. And just finally, I'll just add my own brief thanks to Fred and Terely for taking that risk, and I'm going to make you feel old right now, a quarter century ago, to come to San Francisco and start this church. Thank you for making this a place where, I promised I wouldn't lose it, but where I felt safe to come, ask hard questions, express doubts, re-examine my own faith, wrestle with God in a safe way. Personally, for me, it helped me resolve many of my own internal conflicts and allowed me to reconcile my intellectual and my spiritual life. And this allowed my faith and my understanding of God to flourish and fulfill me in ways I had never expected. So I'm grateful for this community. I'm grateful for everything that you've done for me and for all of us here. So I'm excited to see what God has next for you, and I'm praying for you in this period of discernment. So again, thank you all for coming, and I'd like to invite Scott back up here to give our closing blessing.
Right. Would you stand for prayer, please? The Lord be with you. Let us pray. God of growth and discovery, we thank you for everything that's been shared today. And as we celebrate our brother Fred and his ministry, Terely, their partnership, all that has come through this, we acknowledge that the inspiration that has altered and changed our lives comes from you. The power that has brought us to new opportunities comes from you. So set us to walk the new paths you show us, watching, learning, loving, and trusting until we know the fullness of your reign of justice and peace. We ask this in the name of Jesus, the one who shows us the way. Amen. Enjoy the cake. Peace.